We're going to take it back to pie, but this time we're going to go to Sam.
Oh, cool.
Can you explain the process of fermentation? I know some fruits get broken down in this order to make pies.
Okay.
So I didn't know that. I didn't know that fermentation was used at all in pie making. My understanding was that pie making largely you're like sweetening fruit by adding sugar to it and kind of cooking it down into something that sort of like resembles like a not all the way cooked down jam. But the truth is I don't know that much about pies. But I do know a lot about fermentation. So I'll talk to you a little bit about that. So fermentation is the process of yeasts, and to a degree bacteria, breaking down sugars, and we typically are talking about fermentation as it relates to human food consumption. Human beings have been fermenting food going back probably probably longer than we've had civilization. So current estimates put the origins of civilization at like somewhere between 10 and 13,000 years ago, right? And so that's the time when anthropologists believe that early humans or early civilized humans, I guess I should say, began to develop agriculture in a way that was sustainable and that could sustain larger societies. And so if you've got a situation where you've got regular access to some kind of plant-based food, so specifically things that are going to have sugar in them like grains or fruits, and you have access to that regularly, one of the things that will happen is, and one of the things that did happen to early civilizations was they realized that they could create an abundance of food, but then that food would go to waste. And so fermentation is a process that increases the shelf life of food. It also changes the taste of food. And again, it's thanks to organisms like yeast and bacteria that these things are able to happen. So if we can come up to my screen, I'll just go through a couple examples and then I'll kind of get back to the fruit example. So this is sort of just a artist rendering of Lactobacillus bacteria. So a really common type of fermentation that we talk about is the fermentation done by Lactobacillus. So like yogurt that we eat. Yogurt it can be fermented by different bacteria and yeasts, but the most common one that we think of is Lactobacillus. And Lactobacillus is present all over the place. Surely there's lots of Lactobacillus even in this room right now. And Lactobacillus will get itself onto all different kinds of sugars that are in the environment. If you leave fruit out for long enough, Lactobacillus in the environment can jump on there and start to get to it. Again, what will happen here is, so like Lactobacillus, we call Lactobacillus, you can probably hear that word lacto in it. Lacto refers to milk. The bacillus portion of the word refers to the shape of the bacteria, the fact that they're rod-shaped. It was known early on that you could take milk from a cow and you could leave it out under certain conditions, and the milk would convert to yogurt. And that has to do with the bacteria that were in there, and there are sugars actually inside of milk. There's a milk sugar called lactose, which is made up of two smaller monosaccharides called galactose and glucose. And the lactobacillus can chew down on these sugars and break them up and sort of pre-digest them and create as a byproduct of this pre-digestion lactic acid. And the lactic acid is what gives yogurt its sort of tart sourness, and also makes it easier on folks who are lactose intolerant. So like a lactose intolerant person can often eat yogurt that's been pre-digested by bacteria or fermented by bacteria, because milk sugar, lactose, which is one of the things that bothers folks that have lactose intolerance, is often broken down in yogurt. So when we think about yeast is, and I was going to show this picture too. Oh god, that's so blown up. Let me just zoom out a little bit. So this is just an image of grapes, and I'm sure everybody has seen fruit like this, and we sort of take it for granted, like fruit just looks like this, but almost everyone out there has probably noticed that a lot of fruit you buy has kind of this like filmy white stuff on the outside of it, right? Especially berries, grapes, right? So that white residue that you see on the outside here, and you can see, I'm just going to use my cursor, you can see here it's kind of rubbed away, right? So the grape itself doesn't have this. Grapes are just these purple orbs, but the white stuff on the outside are dead yeast cells, because there are yeast literally living on top of the grapes. And so we think about wine fermentation, the production of wine in the past. This was literally just people taking grapes from the field, crushing them up, and then they knew that if they left them under certain conditions, again, mainly temperature and kept them cellared, the yeast that were already present, I mean, the folks didn't know that it was yeast at the time, but of course the yeast that were already present on the grapes would do the fermenting. And I'll just jump back to this. This is just a diagram of yeast and just sort of shows that very simply what yeast do is they consume sugar, they ferment the sugar, and they produce alcohol as a byproduct of that fermentation. And so this is the way that we make things like beer and wine. Like today, if you want to go out and make beer and wine, you get your grape juice or your grain juice, and you can go buy yeast in the store and pitch it into the juice, and that'll help turn it into the alcoholic beverage. But in the past, it was just natural yeast and bacteria living in the environment that allowed people to ferment these different foods. So just getting back briefly to the pie question, again, I wasn't aware that pie was a food that you used fermented fruits in, but it is easy and really cool to ferment fruits. You can, just in sort of a solution of water, you can leave fruits or even crush fruits up, and fruit juice left to the environment will naturally bubble and sour. So if you wanted to try this at home and ferment a little bit of fruit, you could. Now the only issues that I would say, the things that you would maybe want to watch for would be if you leave it for too long, you can have mold growth on top. So if you have any kind of growths on top of the fermented fruit, you would not want to consume it. That would be a batch that's gone bad. But fermentation, again, increases shelf life. The production of those acids I talked about actually protect the fruit juice. And I think that the other thing you'd want to watch out for is just the fact that alcohol is produced by yeast as they ferment, and so you could end up with something that's a little bit alcoholic, and for young people, you're not going to want to consume that. But just light fermentation, like a day of fermentation, could give you tart fruit that maybe you could use in making a pie. I don't know, because again, I don't know anything about making pie, but you could definitely make sour fruit that way. I was a little all over the place, but
I liked the warning of don't make alcoholic beverages.
Right, do not make alcohol. Well, do, but under the supervision of parents, and then pitch it, don't drink it. It's interesting science, it's just not to be consumed for anyone under the age of 21.
Very true.
Period.